Hey everyone! Tonight we're stepping back into the quiet but demanding world of medieval guild families. Not to admire their crafts or markets, but to uncover the harsh realities woven into their daily lives. While guilds built the backbone of medieval economies, life inside these families was often a constant balance of duty, sacrifice, and expectation that shaped every child's future. So before we dive in, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. Only if you truly connect with what I share here. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is. It's always amazing to see our global community come together. Now, dim the lights, maybe get comfy, and let's settle into this journey together. The childhood apprenticeships that began before you could write. Imagine yourself in a small medieval village centuries ago, where the air carries the steady rhythm of daily life. The soft creak of wooden wheels, the faint scent of freshly tanned leather mingling with the earthiness of the surrounding fields. Here, long before the invention of widespread literacy or the comforts of formal schooling, children were already quietly woven into the fabric of work and tradition. In families tied to guilds, groups that regulated skilled trades such as leatherworking, carpentry, or weaving, children's lives were shaped from their earliest days by apprenticeship. This was not a choice offered later in youth, but an inevitable path set before their hands even learned to grasp a pen or trace letters in a book. Guilds were the centers of craftsmanship and commerce in medieval towns and cities. They governed not only the quality of work, but also the transmission of skills from one generation to the next. For children born into these guild families, their childhood was unlike that of most modern children. Before they could read or write, their fingers learned the delicate art of shaping materials, be it leather, wood, metal, or cloth. The apprenticeship began with small, simple tasks, often given to the youngest hands as a way to familiarize them with tools and materials. Imagine the soft leather, warm and pliable beneath their fingers, or the steady rhythm of a carving knife tracing gentle patterns on a wooden surface under the patient gaze of an elder craftsman. The daily routine of a child apprentice was subtle yet persistent. From early morning, their world was filled with sensory experiences tied directly to the craft. The smell of oils and tanned hides thickened the air, blending with the smoke from nearby hearths and the faint dust from wooden shavings. These children learned not through books, but by watching, touching, imitating, and above all by repetition. Their tiny hands would trace the shapes of tools passed down from generation to generation, their eyes following the careful movements of their mentors. With each small success, the apprentice gained not only skill, but also a growing sense of identity and purpose, tied irrevocably to the family's trade. This method of early apprenticeship was not just practical, but necessary. In a time when formal education was scarce and literacy confined to a privileged few, the transmission of knowledge depended on direct experience. The pace was slow and methodical, a gentle but unyielding current carrying children toward their futures. They learned to observe closely the way a tool felt balanced in the hand, how pressure shaped the material, the subtle sounds that marked quality work, the scrape of leather against a blade, the tap of a chisel against wood. This immersion laid the foundation for mastery. The social structures of medieval guilds reinforced this lifelong bond between child and craft. Guilds often stipulated that apprenticeships began at an early age, sometimes as young as 7 or 8, but many children started in formal training even earlier within the home. These families did not envision alternative futures for their children. The craft was both livelihood and legacy. The child's early life was a quiet unfolding of tradition, punctuated by the rhythm of work and community. The guild halls themselves were places of ceremony and learning, where the apprentice's progress would be marked by stages, each step a passage closer to the status of journeyman and, eventually, master. Yet this childhood was far from carefree. The demands of learning a craft were exacting and required a steady dedication that could feel heavy for such young shoulders. The hours were long, The work sometimes monotonous, but the lessons were crucial. Mistakes could mean ruined materials or flawed products, and thus the trust between master and apprentice was delicate. However, the guidance was often patient. The process of learning was understood as gradual, a lifelong journey rather than a sudden leap. Imagine the quiet concentration of a child carving the same pattern repeatedly, the small rewards of improvement encouraging persistence. Interestingly, this early training often excluded formal literacy in the initial stages. Reading and writing were not prerequisites for a craftsman's skill, though they could become important later for managing guild documents or trade accounts. The primary language of learning was tactile and visual. Understanding came through doing and seeing rather than through written instructions. This mode of apprenticeship reflects a broader medieval worldview, where knowledge was deeply embodied and communal, passed down in workshops rather than libraries. As these children grew, their apprenticeships would expand, encompassing not only the manual skills, but also the social etiquette of the trade. How to negotiate with customers, maintain tools, and uphold the standards that safeguarded the guild's reputation. The workshop was both classroom and social arena, a space where the future was crafted alongside the goods produced. This intertwining of work, family, and community gave apprentices a strong sense of belonging and continuity. Of course, this early immersion was shaped by the realities of medieval life, which were often harsh and uncertain. Childhood did not carry the same protections we assume today. Illness, accidents, and economic pressures were constant companions. The apprenticeship system, while demanding, also offered a form of stability and direction. It was a framework within which children could find their place in a complex society, a scaffold for survival and identity. Reflecting on this, imagine yourself walking the cobbled streets of a medieval town, passing by a small workshop where a child sits quietly, hands stained with the smell of leather, eyes attentive to every movement of the master. The light through the window casts soft shadows on the tools lined neatly on the bench. In that stillness, the future is being shaped, not in the pages of a book, but in the patient repetition of small, deliberate acts. The apprenticeship of childhood in guild families is a window into a world where skill and identity were inseparable, where the quiet diligence of tiny hands built both a craft and a life. It reminds us how deeply human knowledge is rooted in touch, time, and tradition, an intimate rhythm that, for centuries, guided the unfolding of lives before the first words were ever written down. This glimpse into the lives of child apprentices allows us to appreciate the subtle complexities of medieval childhood. How even in an era distant from our own, the universal rhythms of learning, growth, and belonging were quietly, persistently alive. The quiet pressure to maintain a family's long-held reputation. Imagine yourself walking through the narrow streets of a medieval town, where the air carries a faint blend of wood smoke, fresh leather, and the distant sound of hammer striking anvil. Above all, there is an unspoken weight hanging in the quiet corners of these lanes. A weight not measured in gold or land, but in names. A family name, etched into the fabric of the town's life, whispered through generations, and held with an almost sacred reverence. This was the quiet pressure borne by every child born into a guild family, a lineage of craft and reputation that demanded preservation at every turn. To understand this pressure, we must first glimpse what a guild was in those times. These were more than simple trade associations. They were social institutions that governed the production and sale of goods, regulated training and quality, and often shaped the very identity of a town or city quarter. A guild name was a seal of trust and quality, a beacon that told customers, neighbors, and rivals alike, here lives a family whose skill is proven, whose honor is steady, whose work speaks for generations. Imagine yourself now as a child born into such a family, where the craftsman's bench and tools awaited your small hands, and the stories of ancestors were the steady pulse beneath your daily life. The guild was both cradle and cage. From earliest days, Children learned to recognize the delicate patterns on a weaver's loom, or the precise curves of a carpenter's chisel. Their days began before dawn and stretched long, shadowed by the ever-watchful eyes of elders who knew the family's history, not as tales, but as unyielding expectations. A single slip, a flawed stitch, a crooked joint, could ripple beyond the workshop walls, casting a shadow over names long interred beneath the church floor. The family name was not merely theirs. It was a legacy that connected past, present, and future in a continuous thread of responsibility. In these moments, the rhythm of their lives was punctuated by repetition and discipline, and by a constant struggle to measure up. Imagine the quiet tension as the child, their hands trembling with the weight of expectation, attempts a delicate task for the first time. The grandfather's gaze might be steady, but its unspoken message lingers. You are the keeper of our craft. Do not fail us. The older siblings, already marked by their own successes or failures, set the silent benchmarks. Mistakes were lessons, but they also whispered warnings. The pressure to succeed was not just about pride. It was about survival. Guild membership and the privileges it bestowed depended on reputation maintained over decades, sometimes centuries. It is easy to overlook how deeply intertwined identity was with profession in medieval guild culture. Families were often named after their trade or the workshop they ran. The smiths were smiths by name and by fate. Their identity was carved as surely as the iron they shaped. Imagine yourself as a young apprentice, the weight of this connection settling around your shoulders like a cloak, woven tight by duty and honor. You inherited not just tools, but stories, of the great works your ancestors crafted, of the contracts won or lost, of the quiet rivalries with neighboring guilds that shaped town politics and economics. Every strike of the hammer echoed with these silent histories. Yet this heritage came with its share of quiet sacrifice. Childhood was a brief prelude to a life of labor, and dreams outside the family trade were often discouraged, if not outright forbidden. The future was already written in the pattern of the guild's legacy, and stepping outside it risked more than personal disappointment. Imagine the hesitation behind a child's smile when asked if they wished to learn another craft, or to leave for a different town. The answer was often measured not in desire, but in the fear of tarnishing the family name, of leaving ancestors unhonored. The guild system also reinforced social order and community stability. Maintaining a family's reputation meant preserving not only economic status, but social respect and influence. Imagine the pride that filled a guild hall during feast days, or when a new contract was signed. The name of the family was announced, their achievements quietly celebrated with nods and murmurs among fellow townsfolk. Such moments were a balm to the constant tension, a reminder that effort and fidelity to tradition could yield tangible acknowledgement. But even these celebrations held an undercurrent of vigilance, for a single misstep could erase years of goodwill. One might wonder how families coped with this persistent weight. The answer lies partly in the close-knit nature of guild life. Children grew up surrounded by relatives and mentors, their identities shaped by a network of support and oversight. Imagine evenings spent in workshops where stories of past masters were shared softly, the scent of beeswax and wood smoke filling the air, and where lessons came not just through instruction, but through example. These narratives were soothing as much as demanding, offering a sense of belonging and purpose that softened the harshness of expectation. At the same time, the guild's regulatory function demanded strict adherence to quality and practice. Imagine the vigilance of guild inspectors, who visited workshops unannounced to examine goods, ensuring standards were met. For the family, this meant constant diligence. Every finished piece carried their name's weight, a silent contract with the town's trust. The cost of failure was not just economic loss but social stigma, a fracture in a lineage painstakingly maintained. This system also served to create a form of quiet continuity amid the ever-changing tides of medieval life. Wars, plagues, and political upheavals threatened towns and families alike. Yet the guilds remained anchors of stability. Imagine the calm certainty of a guild hall surviving a fire or famine, the family name engraved on the ledger of the town's memory. The pressure to maintain reputation, while burdensome, also provided a thread connecting the past to the future, a symbol of resilience and identity in uncertain times. Yet, not all was seamless harmony. The pressure could fracture families internally, fostering rivalry between siblings or cousins, each eager to prove themselves the true heir to the family craft. Imagine the quiet moments of tension when the elder craftsman's approval was withheld, or when an apprentice's mistake threatened to sully the family honor. These moments were as much a part of guild life as the clang of metal or the scent of fresh wood shavings. Still, the family name endured, passed from one generation to the next with reverence and caution. Imagine the day a young apprentice finally steps forward to sign their work with the family mark, the culmination of years of training and expectation. This act was not simply about craftsmanship, but about joining a lineage, an unbroken chain that linked the past to the present, and the present to an uncertain future. In reflecting on this quiet pressure, we glimpse a world where identity, labor, and legacy were inseparable, where each life was both a single thread and part of a broader tapestry woven across centuries. The weight of a family's reputation was not a distant concept, but a living reality, shaping daily actions and dreams alike. Imagine yourself stepping away from the workshop, feeling the cool air of the medieval evening settle around you, carrying with it the subtle hum of history, responsibility, and the unyielding desire to honor those who came before. In this way, the quiet pressure to maintain a family's long-held reputation was both a burden and a bond, a force that shaped lives with the gentle insistence of time itself, guiding each generation to carry forward the legacy that was more than just a name, but a story written in sweat, skill, and quiet devotion. The limited freedom to choose a path outside the family trade, ChatGPT said. Imagine yourself standing at the threshold of a medieval workshop, the air heavy with the mingled scents of wood shavings, oiled leather, and faint traces of smoke from the hearth. Outside, the rhythm of the village pulses steadily, market cries drifting lazily on a warm breeze, the shuffle of feet on cobblestones, and the occasional clang of hammer on metal. In this quiet yet persistent world, family and craft are inseparable, woven tightly together like threads in a tapestry that spans generations. For many children born into guild families, this tapestry was not merely a symbol of tradition, but a framework that defined their entire existence. From the moment they could grasp tools, their futures were shaped not by personal choice, but by the legacy of their forebears. To leave the family trade was to unravel the threads that connected them to their kin, their community, and their identity. It was a prospect as daunting as stepping off a known path into an uncharted forest, with no clear way back. Guilds, which emerged in medieval towns as tightly regulated associations of craftsmen and merchants, governed not only the economic life of their members, but the social fabric of entire communities. The apprenticeships that children undertook were more than lessons in a trade. They were rites of passage. The sounds of chisels carving stone, the steady beating of the loom, the smell of wet clay and burning pitch. All were elements of a carefully orchestrated daily life, a constant struggle to uphold standards passed down through centuries. Imagine a young boy named Thomas, whose hands knew the weight of a hammer almost before they could hold a spoon. His father, a respected blacksmith, taught him how to shape iron not just to fashion tools, but to build a reputation, to earn respect and sustenance. Each day, Thomas's small hands fumbled clumsily with the bellows and anvil under his father's watchful gaze. Mistakes were met not with harsh punishment, but with a quiet expectation. The craft was unforgiving, and mastery demanded patience and repetition. But beneath this steady routine lay the unspoken truth that the family trade was more than a livelihood. It was a binding contract. Guild membership was hereditary, often reinforced by social and economic pressures that made departure nearly impossible. The walls of the workshop echoed with lessons not only about technique, but about loyalty, duty, and the weight of legacy. To choose a different path was to risk isolation, loss of support, and the fracturing of familial ties that had endured through hardship and history. Imagine now the rare child who dared to dream beyond these boundaries. A girl named Elsbeth, whose fingers longed for the freedom to paint rather than sew, whose heart stirred with stories rather than leatherwork. Yet, in a world where guilds controlled access to skills, markets, and social standing, Elsbeth's desires were shadowed by a persistent, almost invisible pressure. Leaving the family trade meant more than learning a new skill. It meant stepping outside the protective circle of kinship, risking the delicate balance that kept her family afloat. This limitation was not merely social, but practical. Guilds imposed strict rules about who could practice certain trades, often requiring years of apprenticeship and proof of skill before granting membership. Without guild approval, outsiders found doors closed, workshops barred, markets denied. Even if one managed to acquire a different skill in secret, survival outside the family network was uncertain. Dependence on guild support was as real as the forge's heat. To break free was to risk economic ruin as much as social exile. The weight of this unspoken contract shaped the rhythm of many lives. Imagine the slow dawn over a village where every morning, children rose before light to begin their training. The cadence of their days was marked by repetition and resilience. Their ambitions folded quietly into the demands of the craft. Occasionally, whispers of distant possibilities stirred. A traveling merchant's tale, a wandering minstrel's song. But the fabric of their world was sturdy, woven with the threads of obligation and continuity. Historical records reveal stories of those who attempted to break from this mold. Though such tales are few and often tinged with hardship, some left in pursuit of military life, drawn by the promise of honor and escape. But even then, the ties of birth and loyalty shadowed their choices. Others who tried to embrace different trades often faced barriers erected by the guilds themselves, which saw such moves as threats to their economic control. The consequences could be severe: ostracism, legal penalties, or worse. Yet, even within this framework, subtle forms of resistance and adaptation existed. Some children found ways to expand their skills within the guild, combining crafts or innovating within traditional roles. Others married into families of different trades, gently weaving new threads into the tapestry. Over time, as social and economic landscapes shifted, these rigid boundaries began to loosen. But in the medieval period, the freedom to choose a path outside the family trade was limited indeed. Imagine the quiet tension in a household where a child's yearning for something beyond the familiar was met with the steady, unyielding rhythm of the family forge or loom. The bond that held families and guilds together was strong, not merely because of external pressure, but because it was interlaced with identity, survival, and belonging. To step away was to risk unraveling not just one's future, but the shared history and collective security that the family represented. As evening falls and the workshop's light dims, the sounds soften. Tools are cleaned, lessons reviewed, the smell of sweat and smoke settles into memory. The day's work is done, yet the cycle promises to begin anew with the dawn. In this quiet persistence, the story of limited freedom unfolds, a tale of obligation and identity, of dreams quietly held beneath the weight of tradition. This tension between personal desire and inherited duty shaped the lives of countless medieval children, anchoring them to paths laid out long before their first breath. It is a story that echoes still, in the subtle ways that family, tradition, and expectation guide us. Even when the paths ahead seem open, imagine yourself in this rhythm, where choice is both a whispered hope and a boundary firmly drawn. A dance between the known and the unknown, between the past and the possibilities that lie just beyond sight. The duty to memorize craft secrets passed only to blood kin. Imagine yourself stepping into a small, dimly lit workshop, the air thick with the gentle scent of oiled wood and warm metal. The rhythmic tapping of a hammer on anvil resonates softly, echoing a tradition handed down through generations. In the heart of medieval guild culture, this workshop is more than a place of work. It is a sacred space, a vault where craft secrets live and breathe, passed down not to just any eager learner, but carefully guarded within the family bloodline. The duty to memorize these craft secrets was a solemn responsibility, entrusted exclusively to blood kin. Unlike the open knowledge we often take for granted today, medieval crafts thrived on secrecy. Guild families, who formed the backbone of urban economies, developed their skills in careful privacy. Apprenticeships were not casual arrangements but deliberate, long-term commitments beginning often in early childhood, when the young ones could hardly hold a tool properly, let alone read or write. Imagine a child, barely more than a toddler, being introduced to the sounds and smells of the workshop. The hiss of a heated blade being quenched in water, the soft rustle of leather straps, the grainy texture of wood under small fingers. These sensations became the earliest lessons in craft. But the true knowledge, the intricate techniques that transformed raw materials into objects of both utility and art, were locked behind an invisible barrier. Only those born into the family, bound by blood and oath, could cross this threshold. This exclusivity was not mere pride or stubbornness. It was a calculated measure to protect the family's economic survival. Crafts were highly competitive, and guilds operated within a fiercely guarded hierarchy. Secrets of dye mixtures, metal alloys, carving methods, or weaving patterns could mean the difference between a thriving workshop and ruin. When a family's name became synonymous with quality, their secret methods were the treasure they protected above all else. Imagine the quiet tension in a guild meeting hall when the topic of secrecy arose. Elders, draped in simple yet dignified robes, would remind the gathered apprentices and journeymen that loyalty was paramount. A slip of a whispered technique outside the family could invite ruin, legal penalties, loss of standing, or worse. The stakes extended beyond the workshop walls to entire communities, as guild reputations often shaped the economic fortunes of towns themselves. The commitment to secrecy shaped daily life in subtle, yet profound ways. Apprentices learned early that trust was conditional. Friendships with peers outside one's family could be tinged with suspicion. The social world of a craftsman was divided. There was the intimate world of kin and workshop, where secrets were shared in low voices under flickering candlelight, and the wider world of guild members and customers, where information was carefully measured. Picture an evening scene in a medieval town. The streets grow quiet as the workshops close, but inside one house, a fire crackles softly. Around a rough wooden table, a father and his eldest son pore over a well-worn manuscript filled with symbols and diagrams only they understood. These pages contain the family's guarded knowledge. Formulas for tempering steel, designs for intricate embroidery, or steps for treating leather to make it both durable and supple. This knowledge was the key to the family's legacy, whispered from one generation to the next in solemn ritual. Even the act of teaching these secrets was deliberate and cautious. A father might demonstrate a delicate technique with slow, measured movements, watching closely as the child imitates. Corrections came gently but firmly, not just to teach skill, but to instill a sense of reverence and responsibility. The secrets were alive in the rhythm of work, the weight of the hammer, the angle of a chisel, the timing of a dye bath. Memorizing was more than rote learning. It was an embodied practice where knowledge passed through touch, sight, and sound. This careful stewardship of craft secrets also meant that apprentices outside the family faced clear limits. While guilds sometimes admitted external apprentices, the most precious methods remained out of reach, reserved for those who carried the family name. This created a quiet boundary between insider and outsider, a social and economic divide that structured the guild system's hierarchy. For an outsider to penetrate the family's inner circle was rare and often discouraged, for it risked the exposure of secrets that had been painstakingly guarded. Consider, too, the weight this responsibility placed on those who inherited these secrets. It was not merely a skill set, but a form of identity and honor. A young craftsman could not take the knowledge lightly. For failing to protect or properly apply it meant tarnishing not just their own name, but the legacy of ancestors whose lives and reputations were entwined with the family trade. Yet, in this closed world, innovation was not entirely stifled. Within families, techniques could evolve and improve over generations, guided by a deep understanding born from intimate familiarity. But these developments remained within the family vault, shielded from rivals. The balance between preserving tradition and adapting to new challenges was a constant, quiet struggle, one that defined the rhythm of guild life. Imagine now the contrast between this world and the bustling marketplaces outside. There, goods displayed bright colors, gleamed with polished finishes and promised craftsmanship. But the secrets behind their making remained a mystery to all but a few. Buyers might admire the beauty or utility, unaware of the layers of knowledge hidden in every stitch or hammered rivet. As time passed, the power of guild families to control such secrets would face challenges. From the rise of printing and broader trade networks to changes in social and economic structures. But for centuries, this system of guarded craft secrets ensured that skills, knowledge, and economic power remained tightly bound to family lines, shaping not only individual lives, but the very fabric of medieval urban society. So, when you picture that workshop with its familiar sounds and scents, imagine the invisible threads of loyalty, secrecy, and memory woven through the air, connecting generations, binding kin, and preserving the quiet, enduring pulse of a craft passed from hand to hand, blood to blood. This was not merely work. It was a living tradition, held carefully, like a fragile flame, safe within the family's embrace. In this way, the duty to memorize craft secrets was more than a practical necessity. It was a lifelong commitment, a solemn pact that shaped the rhythm of daily life, the course of communities, and the legacy of those who labored with care, skill, and silent devotion. The expectation that boys would succeed their fathers without question. Imagine yourself stepping quietly into a small village in medieval Europe. The early morning mist clings softly to the cobblestone streets, and the air carries the faint scent of wood smoke and damp earth. In a humble house near the village square, a father prepares for the day ahead. His hands, calloused from years of labor, pause for a moment as he looks toward the small figure sitting patiently at the kitchen table, his son. In this moment, a silent expectation lingers in the air, one rarely spoken but deeply understood. The boy will follow in his father's footsteps, inheriting not only the family trade, but also the weight of a lineage that stretches back through generations. This expectation, that sons would succeed their fathers without question, was a foundational thread woven tightly into the fabric of medieval life. The idea of choice, at least in this regard, was often considered a luxury few could afford. From the earliest years, boys were gradually immersed in the craft or occupation their families had long upheld, a rhythm of learning and observation that rarely left room for deviation. Imagine a young apprentice watching his father's hands shape leather or hammer iron, the steady clinks and the texture of materials guiding his small fingers. This silent education was as much about preserving the family's livelihood as it was about maintaining a social order where roles were defined and inherited. The passing of craft secrets, skills, and responsibilities from father to son was not merely practical. It was essential. In an era when guilds regulated trades and knowledge was jealously guarded, These familial transmissions ensured the survival of a craft's integrity and reputation. Secrets were not written in books, but carried in memory and whispered in workshops. Imagine the quiet intensity of these lessons, where a slight slip might cost a family its standing in the community. This system created a sense of continuity, but also a pressure, subtle yet constant, that bound a child's future to that of his father's. For many families, the assumption that a son would take over the trade was so deeply ingrained that the possibility of refusal was seldom entertained aloud. It was as though even naming such an idea risked unraveling the stability that generations had built. The idea of stepping outside this inherited path threatened not just individual identity, but the very structure of family and community. Imagine the silent conflict within a boy who dreams of another life, who senses an urge to explore beyond the boundaries set by his birth, yet finds no language or permission to voice it. This quiet tension often remained invisible, hidden beneath the rhythms of daily chores and the steady march of apprenticeship. The limited freedom to choose a path beyond the family trade reflected broader social realities. Medieval society was predominantly hierarchical and communal, where survival often depended on predictability and continuity. Land, tools, and social connections were entwined with specific roles passed down within families. Imagine a village where everyone knew their place, their responsibilities set not by desire, but by birthright and necessity. In such an environment, stepping away from the expected course could mean isolation or hardship, not just for the individual, but potentially for the entire family. Yet, this expectation was not merely a matter of external pressure. Many sons grew into their roles with a quiet acceptance, shaped by daily immersion and the tangible rewards of mastery. Imagine the satisfaction found in crafting a fine piece of work, in earning respect through skill, in belonging to a lineage that was both history and future. The relationship between father and son, teacher and apprentice, was complex, filled with moments of encouragement as well as discipline. This dynamic shaped not only professional abilities, but also identity, weaving a boy's sense of self tightly with the family name and reputation. However, the weight of this inheritance could also be a source of profound strain. Mistakes were not only personal failures, but reflections on the family legacy, adding a layer of unspoken anxiety to daily tasks. Imagine the silent pressure that accompanied each trial or error, the careful balancing of ambition with the risk of disappointing ancestors whose memory was honored through continued craft. This responsibility often extended beyond craft to include social expectations, marriage alliances, loyalty to guilds, and participation in community life, all reinforcing the ties between individual and lineage. The gendered nature of these expectations is also significant. While daughters contributed to household and community life, the role of successor was overwhelmingly reserved for sons. The assumption that a boy would continue the family line was intertwined with inheritance laws and social structures that prioritized male lineage. Imagine the quiet but powerful societal mechanisms that shaped these roles, limiting choices and defining futures long before a child could articulate desires or ambitions. Throughout this unfolding narrative, imagine the sounds of daily life, the measured rhythm of tools shaping raw materials, the murmur of market chatter, the occasional toll of a distant church bell marking time and tradition. These sounds form a backdrop to a world where the succession of sons to fathers was a constant, a quiet pulse beneath the surface of everyday existence. Even as time flowed on, and societies gradually evolved, the shadow of this expectation lingered. In many places, the slow emergence of new opportunities, cities, and trades began to challenge the rigid patterns of inheritance. But for centuries, in countless villages and towns, the simple, unspoken agreement held firm. A boy's future was, by default, his father's past. In this way, the expectation that sons would succeed their fathers without question was both a stabilizing force and a silent burden. It shaped lives with a delicate mix of duty, tradition, and unvoiced longing. Imagine yourself walking once more through that village, the scent of damp earth rising as evening falls, the faint flicker of candlelight through small windows illuminating the steady continuation of a family story. One that was seldom questioned, yet quietly complex beneath its calm surface. The rhythm of their lives continued, bound by the past, shaped by expectation, and moving always forward into an uncertain future. The subtle rivalries between guild families in the same town. Imagine yourself stepping into a medieval town's bustling streets, where the day unfolds not only with a clatter of carts and the murmur of markets, but also with an undercurrent of quiet competition. Here, guild families, each bound by tradition, craft, and pride, live and work side by side. These families are not just neighbors. They are rivals, locked in subtle contests that ripple through every part of daily life. It is a world where skill is currency, reputation a fragile treasure, and every interaction, even the simplest meal, carries the weight of unspoken rivalry. Guilds in medieval towns served as both professional associations and social networks. They regulated the production of goods, maintained standards, and protected their members' economic interests. But beneath this formal structure lay an ever-present competition. Guilds vied for the most lucrative contracts, the favor of influential patrons, and the respect of their peers. This rivalry was not only between guild masters, but seeped into every corner of their families' lives. It was a constant, quiet battle fought in workshops, marketplaces, and social gatherings alike. Children of guild families were born into this environment of competition. Long before they could take on full responsibilities of the trade, they learned to measure themselves against the children of rival guilds. Apprenticeship was not merely about mastering craft. It was also about preparing to defend and advance the family's standing. Imagine a shared gathering, a meal or a festival, where the atmosphere is warm on the surface, but beneath the table, every glance and gesture is weighted. Eyes subtly assess posture, hands, and even the cut of a sleeve, searching for signs of skill, resources, and ambition. This subtle rivalry shaped childhood in ways that might seem foreign to us today. The youngest members of guild families were already participating in a social dance where alliances and rivalries intertwined. Their movements, words, and even silences were noticed and interpreted. This constant awareness honed a delicate sense of social perception and strategy, a training as vital as learning to wield a chisel or sew a seam. In these moments, family pride was as palpable as the scent of burning wood or the rough texture of leather beneath their fingertips. Guild meetings and town festivals often brought these families together, creating opportunities for both cooperation and competition. Contracts for supplying goods or services to the local nobility or the town itself were precious prizes. Success meant security and prosperity. Failure could lead to decline and loss of status. Thus, every interaction carried an undercurrent of contest, a silent weighing of strengths and weaknesses. Imagine the quiet exchange of glances as guild members sat side by side, sharing food that was at once a gesture of community and a subtle test of generosity or status. Even the workshops themselves could be spaces of rivalry. Craftsmen's skills were visible in their work, and comparisons were inevitable. An apprentice's progress was watched not only by their master, but also by rival guilds, eager for any sign of weakness or innovation. This created a pressure cooker of motivation and caution, where families guarded secrets carefully and celebrated triumphs with measured pride. The rivalry was rarely loud or violent. It was a nuanced, persistent contest played out in the everyday, woven into the rhythms of work and family life. The architecture of the town often reflected these subtle competitions. Guild halls stood as symbols of prestige, sometimes competing in size, decoration, or location. The placement of a workshop on a busy street corner could signal prominence, while the choice of materials and embellishments sent messages of wealth and taste. Even the soundscape, the steady hammering in one workshop or the rhythmic tapping of needles in another, became part of a sensory contest, a quiet orchestra of ambition. These rivalries also extended into marriage alliances, where families sought to strengthen their position through carefully arranged unions. A child betrothed to a member of a rival guild was a bridge, but also a reminder of the constant negotiation between cooperation and competition. Such alliances could ease tensions or ignite new rivalries, weaving a complex social fabric in which family, trade, and ambition were tightly intertwined. Despite these tensions, there was also a shared understanding. Guilds depended on each other to sustain the town's economy and social order. The rivalry was tempered by mutual respect and a recognition that each family's success contributed to the prosperity of all. This balance of competition and cooperation shaped the social dynamics of medieval towns, creating a delicate ecosystem where ambition and tradition coexisted. Imagine now the daily life of a child born into this world, a life where every shared meal, every whispered conversation, and every glance holds meaning. Their education was not only in the craft, but in the subtle art of reading people and situations, learning when to advance and when to retreat. The quiet rivalries between guild families were lessons in resilience, strategy, and identity, echoing through generations like a persistent, unspoken melody. Through this lens, we see medieval guild life not as a static tradition, but as a living, breathing network of relationships marked by subtle contests and deep connections. It is a reminder that competition need not roar to be fierce, and that even the calmest moments can carry the weight of history and ambition. The world of guild families was, in every sense, a delicate balance, one shaped by skill, pride, and the quiet rivalries that stirred beneath the surface of everyday life. The obligation to contribute to guild fees from early earnings. Imagine yourself in the dim light of a modest workshop, the air thick with the faint scent of sawdust and oiled leather. Around you, the steady rhythm of tools shapes raw materials into objects both practical and beautiful. Here, in this shared space, the legacy of a guild is alive, not just in the hands of masters, but carried forward by young apprentices whose eager but cautious fingers learn the craft day by day. Yet, their contribution extends beyond labor alone. From their earliest earnings, these apprentices were expected to give back, a quiet but persistent obligation to support the guild's communal life and collective pride. Guilds were more than mere trade organizations. They were tightly knit communities that depended on the cooperation and mutual support of their members. Imagine the many layers of responsibility binding each individual not just to their family name, but to a wider network that regulated standards, resolved disputes, and funded communal needs. To sustain this complex system required resources, and so guild dues and fees were levied on every craftsman, masters, journeymen, and apprentices alike. Picture the moment a young apprentice, often barely more than a child, receives their first small payment for tasks done under watchful supervision. It was not simply personal income, but a shared contribution, a recognition that their work was part of something greater than themselves. This obligation to hand over a portion of earnings was woven into the very rhythm of apprenticeship life. Imagine the quiet tension as an apprentice counts the few coins earned, perhaps from polishing finished goods or assisting in the workshop, and sets aside part of this modest sum to pay dues. These contributions supported not only the administrative functions of the guild, but also communal funds used in times of hardship, support for sick members, funerals, or assistance to families struck by misfortune. The act of giving was thus both practical and symbolic, affirming the apprentices' role within the collective and their commitment to the craft's enduring legacy. Unlike today's notions of individual income, earnings in a guild context were rarely a private matter. Imagine the communal atmosphere where each member's success was interlinked with the guild's reputation and welfare. An apprentice's payment was not just a reward, but a stake in the guild's ongoing vitality. This sense of shared responsibility nurtured a culture where individual efforts were inseparable from collective well-being. Even young hands understood that their labor contributed not only to their family's livelihood, but to the pride and survival of an entire craft community. The pressure to contribute from early earnings also shaped the apprentice's relationship to work and value. Imagine the growing awareness that each task, no matter how small, had significance beyond personal advancement. The portion handed over was a tangible acknowledgement that the craft was more than a job. It was a heritage requiring constant support. This early lesson in communal obligation encouraged discipline, respect for tradition, and a subtle understanding of economic interdependence within the guild structure. At times, this system could be challenging for apprentices and their families. Earnings were often modest, and the demands of dues might strain limited resources. Imagine the quiet sacrifices made in humble homes where every coin counted, yet where the importance of guild membership was understood as a pathway to stability and respect. The dues functioned as a kind of social insurance, a cost that ensured the apprentice's inclusion in a network that offered protection, training, and social status. Thus, despite hardships, contributing to the guild was seen as an investment in a future secured by shared commitment. Beyond financial support, guild fees were also a tool of governance and quality control. Imagine guild meetings held in smoke-filled halls, where fees collected from members funded the enforcement of standards, apprenticeships, and sometimes even charitable works. Every payment reinforced the apprentice's integration into this system of oversight and mutual accountability. The dues reminded each craftsman, young or old, that skill alone was insufficient without adherence to the collective rules that protected the craft's reputation and market. The rhythm of handing over part of one's earnings became a quiet ritual, marking progress from novice to valued member. Imagine the apprentice gradually gaining trust, their contributions recognized not just in coin, but in the respect earned from peers. This system created a bond of loyalty that extended through guild generations. Each fee paid a stitch in the fabric holding the community together. In moments of celebration, such as guild festivals or religious feast days, the funds collected from dues played a vital role. Imagine the apprentices, alongside masters and journeymen, participating in ceremonies that honored their craft's patron saints or commemorated milestones. The communal pride kindled by these events was fueled by the shared contributions of all members, a tangible reminder of belonging and mutual support. Reflecting on this obligation, one sees how the simple act of handing over a portion of early earnings was much more than a financial transaction. It was an initiation into a culture of collective responsibility, a lesson in how individual labor supports a larger whole, and a foundation for the enduring pride that guild members carried quietly in their hearts. Imagine stepping away from the workshop now, feeling the steady pulse of this tradition, as coins pass from apprentice to guild, and with them, the invisible threads that bind a community across time. Thus, the obligation to contribute to guild fees from early earnings was a subtle but essential force shaping medieval craftspeople. It wove together family, community, and craft into a single, living legacy, one that asked much of the young, but offered in return the strength and stability of belonging to something far greater than themselves. The discipline of endless practice to meet exacting standards. Imagine the first light of dawn filtering softly through the small windows of a medieval workshop. The air is cool, but already carries the faint scent of wood smoke mingled with the earthy aroma of stone dust and worn leather. Inside, a child rises before the village stirs awake, drawn by a silent summons to begin another day bound tightly to the family craft. The discipline of endless practice is not a choice but a necessity, an unyielding path where every motion must be perfected, every gesture exact, until skill becomes as natural as breathing. In these early hours, the rhythm is steady and unbroken. The boy or girl, barely tall enough to reach the anvil or loom, repeats the same motions again and again, hammering iron, pulling thread through fabric, carving wood with precision. The sound is a gentle percussion, the tapping of hammer on metal, the soft rustling of cloth, the scrape of blade against grain. This repetition, measured and tireless, is not mere labor, but a shaping of the self. Muscle memory weaves into identity, forging not just a craftsman's skill, but a life defined by dedication. Imagine the child's hands, roughened yet steady, learning the delicate balance between strength and finesse. The calluses growing like quiet badges of honor, the fingers responding before thought can intervene. Early mistakes fade into a continuous flow of motion, as if the body and craft merge into one entity. This ceaseless repetition might seem monotonous to an outside eye, but within it lies the deep structure of mastery, an invisible scaffold holding future expertise. The guild's exacting standards demanded nothing less than perfection. Every finished piece was scrutinized, not only for function but for form, for artistry, for conformity to centuries-old tradition. The child understood that each stroke of the chisel, each measured cut of cloth, was a step on a path that had to be followed without deviation. The pressure was constant but quiet, a presence felt in the steady gaze of the master craftsman and the unspoken expectations of family and community. Imagine the long hours stretching into twilight, when the workshop's lanterns cast flickering shadows on the walls. The child's muscles ache, yet the motions persist, driven by the knowledge that mastery demands this kind of endurance. The world outside slows into stillness, but inside, practice continues, each repetition a thread woven into the fabric of expertise. This disciplined endurance was more than physical. It was a mental shaping, training focus and patience, forging resilience in the face of weariness. Historical accounts remind us that this relentless practice was not without cost. The days were long, the work demanding, and mistakes could bring consequences ranging from gentle correction to harsher reprimands. But through this rigorous process, children grew not only into skilled artisans, but into bearers of their families' legacies. The craft became a language spoken fluently by calloused hands and practiced eyes, a means of survival and a source of pride. Within this steady repetition, moments of subtle discovery emerged. A slight adjustment of wrist, a new angle of cut, a smoother stitch. Each small innovation born from years of persistent attention. Such refinements, though minute, mark the boundary between apprentice and master, the line where discipline met creativity. Yet even creativity was bound within the guild's traditions, a careful dance between innovation and respect for inherited knowledge. Imagine the village workshop as a microcosm of this balance, where the rhythm of practice echoes the pulse of community life, where the children's efforts sustain the family and uphold the guild's reputation. The discipline of endless practice shaped more than skill. It forged character, patience, and an understanding of one's place in a world governed by craft and continuity. As you imagine the fading light of day and the quiet settling of the workshop, consider the weight of these repeated motions, not just as labor, but as the slow, steady crafting of identity itself. The hammers fall, the needles pull, the carvings scrape, each a note in the lullaby of discipline, a testament to lives shaped by the steady hand of repetition, persistence, and purpose. The unspoken shame of producing goods declared unfit by elders. Imagine yourself in the stillness of a medieval workshop, where the faint glow of a candle flickers against wooden beams, casting soft shadows on rough-hewn tools. The air carries a faint mix of wood shavings, molten metal, and beeswax polish, scents that speak of craft, tradition, and careful labor. In this world, every piece created is more than an object. It is a testament to skill, patience, and the weight of family legacy. Yet, within this quiet reverence lies a subtle but profound burden. The unspoken shame of producing goods deemed unfit by the elders. The creation of a single flawed item was never just a matter of wasted materials. It was a delicate failure felt deep in the bones of a craftsman's family, echoing through whispered conversations and lingering glances. Imagine a young apprentice, perhaps no older than 10, nervously presenting their first carved wooden panel or hammered iron fitting to the master craftsman, often their own parent or grandparent. The workshop falls silent as the elder inspects the piece, eyes narrowing not in anger, but in quiet disappointment. This disappointment was a language understood without words. A flawed product suggested something more troubling than an imperfect cut or uneven stitch. It hinted that the child might lack the innate gift required to uphold the family's reputation. In a world where craft skills were considered part talent, part sacred inheritance, such a failure was not easily forgiven. It was a question posed silently but sharply. Did this young hand possess the calling, the aptitude, to carry forward a lineage steeped in centuries of mastery? Imagine the tension in that moment. The apprentice's breath held, the steady rhythm of hammering paused, the weight of expectation pressing invisibly yet palpably in the air. To the outside eye, a flawed piece might seem a small matter, a stepping stone in learning. But within these walls, where family honor and economic survival intertwined, it was a quiet fracture in the trust placed upon the apprentice's shoulders. The shame was unspoken but pervasive. No harsh words were needed to convey the sting. Instead, it seeped into the fabric of daily life. A lowered gaze, a subtle hesitation, a slower pace in subsequent tasks. All were signs of the child wrestling with the internal shadow cast by that imperfect creation. The workshop, usually a place of steady rhythms and shared purpose, might feel colder, the bonds a little more fragile. Moreover, this shame did not exist in isolation. It touched not only the individual, but the entire family network. Craftsmanship was a collective identity, a shared inheritance. A single misstep risked staining the family name in the eyes of guild members and patrons alike. The reputations built over generations, carefully guarded and fiercely protected, could be unsettled by one poorly executed piece. Imagine now the elders, seasoned hands weathered by years of toil and tradition, balancing discipline with the fragile hopes of youth. They bore the responsibility of shaping talent while maintaining the family's standing. Their judgments, often quiet and measured, carried immense weight. A product rejected was a silent test, an invitation to redouble effort, learn patience, and refine skill. Yet, for the child, this process could feel like a slow erosion of confidence, an invisible line drawn between success and failure. Within this dynamic, there was also a paradoxical tenderness. Elders knew the harshness of their expectations could bruise young spirits, yet they saw these trials as necessary to safeguard the craft's future. The shame, while real, was also a crucible, a rite of passage through which true mastery was forged. The workshop became a space where resilience was built in the quiet aftermath of each disappointment, where the rhythm of practice soothed the sting of failure. Consider too the rituals surrounding correction. A flawed piece might be carefully dismantled, the material salvaged and reused. The process was slow and deliberate, a lesson in humility and persistence. The apprentice might watch as the master demonstrated the right technique again and again, each motion steeped in patience and exactitude. These moments reinforced that skill was not just inherited, but cultivated through diligence, a long journey with no shortcuts. Outside the workshop, the broader guild community would quietly acknowledge these dynamics. Fellow craftsmen and patrons understood that mastery demanded rigor, and that occasional flaws were part of the learning curve. But the shadow of shame always lingered. It shaped interactions, invitations to apprentice, and even marriage prospects within guild families, as skill was not only a means of livelihood, but a marker of personal worth and social standing. Imagine, finally, how this quiet shame influenced the apprentice's inner world. It was not a loud condemnation but a subtle companion, sometimes a motivator, sometimes a weight. It shaped how they viewed themselves, their hands, and their place in the unbroken chain of craft and kin. Over time, some would rise above this shadow, their perseverance turning early failures into steps toward mastery. Others might falter, retreating into silence or seeking paths beyond the family workshop. In this way, the unspoken shame of producing goods declared unfit was more than a fleeting discomfort. It was a profound undercurrent in the rhythm of medieval craft life, a reminder that every stroke, every cut, every stitch was woven into the fabric of family legacy and personal identity. It shaped not only the objects born in the workshop, but the very lives of those who labored in quiet devotion, carrying forward traditions both fragile and enduring. The custom of marking each work with a family symbol of pride. Imagine yourself standing in the warm glow of a medieval workshop, where shafts of light filter through narrow windows, dust particles drifting lazily in the air. The scent of fresh wood shavings mingles with the faint metallic tang of tools, and the quiet rhythm of hammer striking chisel fills the space. On a worn workbench lies a freshly crafted piece, a wooden chest, a leather strap, or perhaps a finely wrought blade, waiting for its final touch. That touch, small yet profound, is the family's mark, carefully etched into the surface. This simple symbol carried weight far beyond its size. It was a signature of pride, identity, and responsibility. In the guild system of the medieval world, every crafted piece bore a maker's mark, a unique emblem representing the family or workshop responsible for its creation. These marks were more than mere signatures. They were badges of honor and guarantees of quality. Imagine the trust placed in such a mark by buyers who relied on the reputation it conveyed. A well-regarded maker's mark could elevate a piece from ordinary to prized possession, while a flawed or unknown symbol might diminish its value and standing in the market. For children growing up within these families, learning to carve this mark was not simply a technical skill, but a significant rite of passage. Imagine a young apprentice, fingers steadying a carving tool as a father or master watches closely, guiding the hand that traces the familiar lines and curves of the family emblem. This act was a delicate blend of precision and pride, teaching patience, care, and attention to detail. It was a moment when the apprentice not only learned craftsmanship, but also stepped into a lineage, a chain linking past, present, and future generations. The maker's mark was a visible reminder of what was at stake. Each piece represented not just labor, but legacy. Imagine the pressure quietly borne by the child as they prepared to imprint the family symbol, knowing that a single mistake could affect the perception of skill and honor. It was a responsibility that spoke to the larger social context of the guild, where reputation was currency and trust was hard-won. The mark sealed a promise that this work met the standards upheld by ancestors and would uphold the family's name in the broader community. Guild regulations often reinforce the importance of these marks, sometimes requiring them by law. Imagine a bustling market where merchants and buyers scrutinize wares, familiar with the marks that signify quality and reliability. This system created a network of accountability, linking craft to identity and trade to trust. In some cases, these symbols were carefully recorded, creating an archival memory of makers across time and place. Such records provide modern historians with glimpses into the lives of those who shaped the material world centuries ago. Beyond the practical, the maker's mark held emotional and symbolic meaning. It was an emblem of belonging and continuity, connecting the craftsman to a family story that extended far beyond the workshop walls. Imagine the quiet pride swelling within a young apprentice as they first carve their mark, feeling part of something greater, an invisible thread woven into the fabric of their community. This act, repeated countless times across centuries, was a way of anchoring identity in a world where so much was uncertain. At the same time, the maker's mark was a delicate reminder of vulnerability. Imagine the weight of possibility that hovered over each new creation. Success could bring honor and prosperity, but failure or poor workmanship could cast shadows over a family's standing. The mark was both a shield and a challenge, encapsulating the dual nature of craft as both art and livelihood. The practice of marking work with a family symbol also highlights the deep interconnection between personal skill and communal trust in medieval society. Imagine the workshop filled with the soft murmurs of conversation, the tapping of tools, and the occasional sound of approval or gentle correction. Within this atmosphere, the maker's mark served as a quiet yet powerful anchor, an assurance to both maker and buyer that the work was true, honest, and part of a legacy carefully guarded. As you step back from the workbench, the newly marked piece gleams softly in the light, its surface bearing the subtle but unmistakable imprint of generations past. The family symbol, etched with care and intention, stands as a testament to the hands that shaped it and the lives intertwined with its creation. Imagine this mark traveling far beyond the village, crossing markets and borders, carrying with it stories of skill, pride, and enduring tradition. In this way, the custom of marking each work with a family symbol was more than a practical necessity. It was a quiet ritual of identity, connection, and hope. It reminded every maker, young and old, that they were part of a lineage defined by craftsmanship and honor. Imagine the cycle continuing, as new generations learn the steady hand and steady heart needed to carry the family mark forward. A small symbol with a vast, lasting meaning. The quiet envy of children who could play instead of work. Imagine yourself in a medieval town, the cobbled streets alive with the laughter and shouts of children at play, chasing each other in carefree games, their voices carrying lightly on the breeze. Outside, the sun warms the stones, and the scent of freshly baked bread drifts from nearby ovens. Yet just beyond the open windows of workshops and homes, another world unfolds, one of quiet toil and whispered longing. Inside, young apprentices bend over their tasks, their fingers stained with dye, their eyes focused on tools passed down through generations. These children are part of a proud tradition, yet beneath that pride lies a subtle, unspoken sorrow, the envy of those moments lost to play. For many children born into guild families, apprenticeship began almost as soon as they could stand. While other children roamed freely, these apprentices were drawn indoors, their time occupied with learning the craft that would one day define their place in society. Imagine a child pausing briefly from stitching leather or shaping wood, their gaze drifting to the open doorway or window where the sounds of play spill in. There is a faint tension there, a mixture of admiration for the carefree games and a quiet yearning for the freedom those games represent. This quiet envy was rarely voiced. It was a delicate feeling, tucked beneath layers of family expectation, social pride, and the daily demands of work. The apprentice understood that their labor was essential, not only for the family's livelihood, but for their own future security and honor. They were part of a lineage, a respected guild that carried weight in the community. To express longing for leisure might feel like weakness or ingratitude. So instead, these feelings were folded carefully inward, a gentle ache beneath the steady rhythm of daily work. The rhythm itself was both comforting and relentless. The steady beat of hammer on leather, the whisper of a knife slicing thin wood, the subtle scent of oils and dust. It was a world full of sensory details that marked the passage of time. Each repetition was a lesson, each small success a quiet triumph. But even as the apprentice mastered their tasks, their mind could wander to those fleeting moments outside. Games of tag, races down narrow lanes, or simply sitting under a tree's shade with friends. These images were like distant melodies, soft and persistent. There was also a social divide inherent in this separation. The children playing freely often came from families without the same guild ties, or whose lives were structured differently by circumstance. For apprentices, The path was more prescribed, more constrained. Their days were measured by the demands of skill acquisition and family expectations, leaving little room for spontaneous joy. The boundaries between work and play were sharply drawn, and crossing them was seldom possible. Yet this division also shaped character. The discipline learned in those early years, the focus and patience demanded by apprenticeship, became the foundation for mastery and independence. The quiet envy of play was balanced by a growing sense of purpose and belonging. Over time, apprentices came to understand that their work connected them to a larger community, that their efforts ensured not only personal survival, but also the continuation of traditions that defined their town and family. Sometimes, during rare breaks or festivals, apprentices could join in the games, their laughter blending briefly with the sounds of carefree children. These moments were treasured, brief islands of freedom in an otherwise structured existence. The memory of play fueled perseverance during long hours of labor, a reminder that joy could still be found even within duty. Imagine, then, the complex emotions of a child apprenticing in a quiet workshop. The mingling of pride and longing, duty and desire, tradition and fleeting innocence. Their world was one of subtle contrasts, where the quiet envy of play was held gently alongside the steady pulse of work. This delicate balance shaped not only the apprentices' skills, but their very sense of self. Through this lens, we glimpse the texture of medieval childhood. Not a simple tale of hardship or joy, but a nuanced dance between worlds. The quiet envy of children who could play instead of work was part of the tapestry, woven with threads of family, craft, and community. It reminds us that behind every legacy lies a human story, rich with small sorrows and unspoken dreams. The burden of expectations carried by the youngest children. Imagine yourself in a modest workshop bathed in soft morning light, where the scent of wood shavings mingles gently with the faint aroma of beeswax and oil. Around you, the rhythm of labor carries on, a quiet cadence marking the passage of time and skill handed down through generations. In this space, the youngest child watches and learns, though the weight upon their small shoulders often feels far heavier than their years might suggest. When older siblings have died or departed, the responsibility of carrying on the family trade often falls squarely upon them, binding them to a fragile chain that stretches back into history. In medieval guild families, birth order carried unspoken significance. Imagine the eldest sibling, trained from childhood to master the craft, stepping into the father's shoes with measured confidence. Their footsteps mark the beginning of a lineage carefully preserved through discipline and toil. Yet life's uncertainties, illness, accidents, or the lure of distant towns could fracture this chain. When elder brothers or sisters were no longer present to bear the family's mantle, the youngest, often still in their earliest years of training, found themselves thrust into a role that demanded more than their tender hands and growing minds seemed prepared to offer. This burden was not merely practical, but deeply emotional. Imagine the youngest child, caught between the innocence of youth and the looming expectations of survival and legacy. The workshop, once a place of gradual learning and exploration, became a stage where every movement mattered, where mistakes echoed beyond the present moment to shadow the family name. Even before they fully understood the complexity of the craft, they grasped the necessity of perseverance. The knowledge that their efforts were not just personal progress, but a lifeline for those who had come before. The pressure to fulfill this role shaped daily life in profound ways. Imagine mornings beginning early, the youngest child rising before dawn to tend to tools and prepare the workspace, shadowed by memories of siblings no longer there. Their days stretched long, filled with careful practice under the watchful eyes of elders or journeymen, who recognized both their youth and the heavy load they carried. Training was rigorous, yet suffused with a quiet urgency. The clock did not wait, and the family's survival hinged on mastery gained swiftly. Within the community, this dynamic was understood, but rarely spoken aloud. Imagine neighbors exchanging glances when the youngest took on responsibilities beyond their years, aware that the family's fate rested on fragile shoulders. The guild itself, while structured and formal, often extended informal support, experienced members stepping in to guide or ease the transition. But the youngest child remained the symbolic and practical heir. This role carried a dual nature, both a source of pride and an unrelenting demand. The family workshop became a crucible where the youngest child's identity intertwined tightly with duty. Imagine moments of quiet solitude amid the steady tapping of hammer and saw, where youthful doubts flickered but were smothered by the gravity of expectation. The trade was no longer a future possibility, but an immediate necessity, a path they had little choice but to walk. Each finished piece was a testament not only to skill but to resilience, a silent vow to honor absent siblings and ancestors alike. This burden shaped relationships within the family as well. Imagine parents, torn between nurturing their youngest child's growth and urging the swift acquisition of skills needed to sustain the household. Love and expectation mingled in careful balance, with encouragement shaded by the knowledge that failure could mean economic hardship or social decline. The youngest child's successes were celebrated quietly, but carried the weight of entire family fortunes. Despite the gravity of their position, the youngest children often found unexpected sources of strength. Imagine their gaze turning toward the tools passed down through generations, the worn handles and polished surfaces whispering stories of endurance. The knowledge that they were part of a living tradition, connected to craftsmen long gone but never forgotten, offered a subtle comfort amid the strain. The guild's rituals, the communal celebrations, and the shared pride in the craft became threads weaving them into a larger tapestry of belonging. Yet this burden was also a reminder of life's fragility in medieval times. Families could be torn apart by disease, conflict, or misfortune with little warning. Imagine the quiet moments when the youngest child pauses, feeling the weight of those lost and the uncertainty of the road ahead. Their role was as much about carrying memory as it was about crafting goods, a living bridge between past and future. In stepping back from the workshop, imagine the soft twilight settling over the town, the youngest child's silhouette framed by the fading light. The burden they carry is unseen by many but felt deeply, a constant companion shaping their days and dreams. It is a burden born of necessity and love, a responsibility that knits together family, craft, and survival in a fragile but enduring chain. Thus, the youngest children in guild families bore a unique and profound weight. From tender years, they understood their place not only as learners, but as guardians of a legacy vulnerable to the whims of fate. Their quiet endurance ensured that the lineage of skill and honor, painstakingly built by those before them, did not falter but continued to echo through time, one careful stroke at a time. The ritual of guild dinners where hierarchy was reinforced. Imagine the long wooden table stretching beneath the low, timbered ceiling of a guild hall, its surface worn smooth by countless hands and years. The air is thick with the comforting aroma of fresh bread, simmering stews, and the faint smoke of burning herbs. Lanterns cast a warm, flickering glow, creating shadows that dance softly along the stone walls. In this setting, the ritual of the guild dinner unfolds, not merely a time to eat, but a carefully choreographed performance of order, respect, and hierarchy. Children enter quietly, their footsteps light on the stone floor, eyes attentive to the movements around them. These dinners are as much lessons as any day spent hammering iron or stitching leather. Every detail is observed. The way elders take the highest seats at the head of the table, their posture steady and assured. The order in which food is served, starting with the most senior. The way servants move discreetly, fulfilling needs without interruption. These are not casual meals, but ceremonies that silently instruct each participant on their place within the guild's social structure. Imagine a young apprentice seated toward the far end of the table, The hum of conversation a steady background to the ritual. The child watches as older members exchange greetings and stories, their voices low but confident. There is a rhythm here, a protocol of deference and acknowledgement. The positioning around the table reflects years of accumulated respect, skill, and seniority, an unspoken map of authority and belonging. This strict order was rarely challenged, for it was embedded deeply in the guild's identity. Elders who had earned their place at the top had done so through decades of labor, mastery, and service. To sit higher meant more than comfort. It was a symbol of achievement and trust. Children learned that this was the natural order, one to be accepted and aspire to, yet never easily disturbed. The lessons of the dinner table reinforced the same values taught in the workshop: discipline, respect, and an understanding of one's role within a larger whole. Imagine the sounds of cutlery against wooden plates, the murmur of voices weaving between laughter and serious discussion. The food itself, simple but hearty, binds the group together, nourishing bodies as the ritual nourishes tradition. The sharing of bread and broth becomes a silent language, a covenant between generations, reminding all present of their duties and their place within the collective. Over time, these guild dinners became a cornerstone of social life. They marked celebrations, decisions, and moments of reflection, weaving the community's fabric tighter with each gathering. The children's eyes remained watchful, learning not just the craft, but the customs that governed their future. Their place at the table was a constant reminder that belonging came with expectations, and that stepping beyond these boundaries was rare and fraught with consequence. As the meal draws to a close, the elders rise with measured grace, their movements deliberate and composed. The apprentices mimic the gestures, their bodies absorbing lessons as surely as their minds. The flickering lantern light softens, and the hall grows quiet save for the settling of chairs and the shuffling of feet. The ritual concludes, but its teachings linger, imprinted on the children's understanding like the gentle imprint of a seal. Imagine yourself in this scene, where every bite and gesture is part of a larger story, where food and fellowship become the medium through which order is preserved and passed on. The guild dinner is not simply a meal, but a living tradition, a constant, comforting rhythm that shapes lives as surely as the workbenches and anvils, a ceremony of belonging, hierarchy, and the enduring ties that hold a family and community together. The fear that illness could end a family's livelihood overnight. Imagine the quiet dawn breaking over a medieval town, where narrow streets begin to stir with the soft footsteps of early risers. Within a small, humble workshop nestled between stone walls, the rhythm of daily labor is about to begin. Yet, beneath the surface of this familiar routine lies a fragile reality. One sudden illness could unravel everything a family had built, threatening to end their livelihood overnight. In these times, the workshop was more than a place of work. It was the heartbeat of the family's existence. Every member, from the youngest child sweeping shavings from the floor to the eldest craftsman shaping metal or weaving cloth, played a vital role. Each hand contributed not only skill, but also strength and endurance. Imagine the delicate balance maintained daily, where the health of every individual was as crucial as the craft itself. When illness struck, even as silently as a creeping fever, its consequences were immediate and profound. There was no safety net to catch the family in such moments of vulnerability. No insurance, no social welfare, no medical support system to turn to. The workshop's pulse slowed with the fading vigor of its members. A fever meant more than discomfort. It meant tools lying idle, orders delayed, and the precious flow of income drying up. Picture a mother, usually steady and sure, now resting against the wooden bench, her hands trembling as she tries to hide her weakness from the others. Her skill at stitching fine leather was essential for the family's trade, and without her steady touch, the quality of goods suffered. A father, perhaps a blacksmith, feeling the weight of exhaustion, struggles to lift the hammer with the usual strength. Each day he is forced to rest is a day the forge goes cold, and the family's reputation with customers begins to waver. This fear was ever present, threading through the lives of every craftsman and apprentice. To fall ill was not merely a personal hardship. It was a threat to the entire family's survival. The very skills passed down with such care, the honed eye, the practiced wrist, the patient hand, were suddenly rendered useless by the frailty of the body. Imagine the anxious glances exchanged between family members as they wondered who might next succumb to sickness, aware that the loss of even one could tip the fragile balance. The nature of medieval illness made this fear all the more acute. Without modern medicine, fevers could escalate rapidly, and common ailments often became deadly. Remedies were limited, relying on herbal concoctions, prayers, or traditional treatments whose effectiveness varied. The workshop, once a place of productivity, could transform into a place of quiet despair, where whispered hopes mingled with the scent of medicinal herbs and the faint chill of damp walls. Families developed informal strategies to cope with this ever-present risk. Older children might be tasked with lighter work to conserve strength, while others stretched their skills to cover absent members. Neighbors sometimes offered assistance, but such help was never guaranteed and could not replace the irreplaceable skill and knowledge held within the family unit. Imagine, too, the social implications of illness. A family standing within the guild and community could falter if their output declined or deadlines were missed. Patrons might look elsewhere, and rival workshops could seize the opportunity to advance. The pressure to recover quickly was immense, yet rest was a luxury few could afford. This dynamic shaped not only the physical routines of craft, but also the emotional landscape of medieval families. The fear of sudden illness was a silent, constant companion, influencing how families organized their days and safeguarded their health. It underscored the preciousness of each member's presence and the fragility of their shared enterprise. Over time, such fears also fostered resilience and adaptability. Some families diversified their skills so that if one member faltered, others could step into different roles. Others passed down not just craft secrets, but also knowledge of herbal remedies and care, blending skill with survival wisdom. In this way, the fear that illness could end a family's livelihood overnight was more than a passing worry. It was woven into the very fabric of medieval workshop life. It shaped how families valued health, how they shared responsibility, and how they carried forward traditions in the face of uncertainty. The hands that crafted fine goods were also hands that tended the sick, guarded fragile lives, and held hope steady amid the quiet shadows of vulnerability. The obligation to train younger apprentices even while still learning. Imagine yourself in a bustling medieval workshop where the air hums softly with the sounds of diligent labor. The faint clatter of tools mingles with the low murmur of voices, some instructive, some curious, creating a rhythm that shapes the daily lives of those within these walls. Amid the scent of freshly cut wood and oiled leather, a slightly older apprentice pauses his own work to guide a younger newcomer. This moment reflects a deeply rooted custom, the obligation placed upon those still learning to teach others, a responsibility demanding patience and discipline far beyond their years. In the guild traditions of medieval Europe, the process of apprenticeship was more than individual learning. It was a communal journey. Imagine a workshop where children, barely beyond childhood themselves, balance their own progress with the task of mentoring younger peers. This dual role was not assigned lightly. Even as these older apprentices honed their skills, learning the subtleties of their craft and the secrets passed down through generations, they were expected to step into the role of teacher, embodying both mastery and humility. This arrangement served several practical and social purposes. Imagine the crowded workshops where the master craftsman's time was precious and stretched thin, unable to provide constant supervision to every eager learner. Entrusting older apprentices with the guidance of novices was a necessity that reinforced learning through repetition and responsibility. The act of teaching required the apprentice to slow down, articulate their knowledge, and model techniques with care, deepening their own understanding while fostering a sense of community. The challenge was considerable. Imagine a young apprentice, perhaps only a few years older, tasked with maintaining patience while correcting the mistakes of a child still fumbling with basic tools. This role demanded more than skill. It required emotional maturity, calm endurance, and an ability to nurture confidence in others despite their own uncertainties. The older apprentice's discipline was tested daily, balancing personal ambition with the selflessness needed to nurture the next generation. This tradition also underscored a broader cultural value, that learning was never purely individual, but a shared endeavor. Imagine a chain of hands, each passing knowledge along with care, connecting the past to the future through continuous instruction. The older apprentice's role was a crucial link in this chain, embodying the collective memory and expertise of the guild. In teaching others, they reinforced their own place within this lineage and strengthened the social fabric of their craft community. Moreover, the experience of guiding younger apprentices helped shape character in subtle yet profound ways. Imagine the quiet growth in responsibility that came not from external commands, but from the apprentice's own awareness of their role. This obligation fostered leadership qualities, patience under pressure, and a deepened respect for tradition and craftsmanship. In these moments, the apprentice began to transform, not only as a maker, but as a custodian of knowledge and culture. At the same time, this system could be a source of tension and strain. Imagine the delicate balance between learning and teaching, where an apprentice's own mistakes or doubts had to be set aside to support others. The pressure to appear confident, to model proper technique, and to maintain order within a sometimes chaotic workshop environment weighed heavily. Yet, within this pressure lay an unspoken reward: the gradual emergence of mastery and the fulfillment of belonging to a living tradition. The sights and sounds of this world bring the custom to life. The steady tap of a hammer, the whispered correction of a novice's grip, the quiet pride in a small success shared between teacher and student. Imagine the warmth of a sunlit workshop corner, where an older child patiently demonstrates a stitch or stroke, the younger apprentice watching intently, absorbing not only technique, but the rhythms and values of their shared craft. In this way, the obligation to train younger apprentices while still learning was more than a practical necessity. It was a vital thread in the tapestry of medieval guild life, weaving together growth, responsibility, and community. Imagine yourself stepping back from the workshop's hum, sensing the invisible bonds forged through these quiet acts of teaching and learning, a cycle of care and skill that sustained generations. Through this enduring custom, medieval apprentices did not merely inherit skills. They inherited the weight and grace of stewardship, carrying forward the legacy of their craft with hands both learning and guiding, imperfect yet resolute. The constant vigilance against rival guilds poaching clients. Imagine yourself in a medieval town where every stone and timber seems to hum with the quiet tension of competition. Here, guild families live not only by the skill of their hands, but also by the strength of their reputations. Fragile treasures carefully built over years and guarded with unwavering vigilance. The marketplace is a web of trust and rivalry, where a single rumor can ripple through the town like a silent wave, threatening to undo months of careful work. In this delicate balance, even the youngest family members learn early the importance of guarding not only their craft, but also their words and alliances. Guilds functioned as both protective networks and competitive entities. Each family's livelihood depended heavily on the contracts they secured, often with local nobility, merchants, or the town itself. Losing a contract to a rival was more than just a financial setback. It could mean diminished status, fewer opportunities, and a long climb back to respect. This created an atmosphere where vigilance was constant, and suspicion lingered beneath courteous greetings and shared meals. Families knew that reputation was the foundation of their survival. A single whisper, an unfounded accusation, a misstep in quality, or even the hint of disloyalty could cause clients to hesitate, looking elsewhere for goods or services. The fear of such losses meant that family members were always alert, watching not only their own conduct, but also the subtle movements of competitors. In this environment, silence and discretion were as valuable as skillful craftsmanship. Children born into these guild families absorbed this atmosphere from a young age. Their education extended beyond mastering tools. It included learning the careful dance of social interaction and the power of words. Imagine a family meal where laughter and conversation flow, but beneath the surface, each phrase is measured, each glance weighed. The young apprentice quickly senses that loose talk could invite trouble, that stories shared too freely might be repeated in distorted forms, fueling rivalries or undermining alliances. This early training in discretion was part of a broader lesson in loyalty and trust. Children learned to recognize the subtle signals of shifting allegiances, the undercurrents of gossip that could sway opinion. They were taught to speak carefully, to avoid boasting or revealing weaknesses, and to understand that sometimes silence was the strongest defense. The lessons were often implicit, woven into everyday life rather than stated outright, forming a quiet vigilance that became second nature. Guild meetings and public gatherings further reinforced this dynamic. While appearing as forums for cooperation and mutual support, these occasions were also opportunities to observe rivals, gauge their strategies, and protect one's interests. Families kept a close watch on who was gaining favor or forging new connections, ready to respond to any sign of encroachment. Contracts were negotiated with care, and even minor disputes could escalate into lasting tensions if not handled delicately. The stakes of this vigilance extended beyond business to the very identity of the family. Guild membership carried prestige and honor, symbols of belonging and achievement. To lose reputation was to lose a part of oneself. This created a powerful motivation to maintain appearances, uphold quality, and demonstrate unwavering loyalty to clients and allies. The pressure was felt deeply, a constant undercurrent shaping decisions and interactions. Imagine the quiet intensity behind the scenes. A father reviewing contracts late into the evening, a mother cautioning her children about strangers' questions, an apprentice watching and learning not only how to shape materials, but how to navigate the complex social world around them. Each moment was infused with the knowledge that one misstep could tip the balance, that vigilance was both shield and sword. Yet, despite these tensions, the guild system also fostered resilience and adaptability. Families developed strategies to weather setbacks, to rebuild trust, and to cultivate new opportunities. The careful guarding of reputation did not simply restrict. It also enabled a community to thrive amid competition, preserving the delicate ecosystem of craft, commerce, and kinship. Through this perspective, we see that medieval guild life was more than the visible craftwork. It was a nuanced dance of watchfulness, loyalty, and social intelligence. The constant vigilance against rival guilds poaching clients was a lesson taught early and carried deeply. An invisible thread that bound families together and shaped their every word and action. In this quiet tension, the future was both protected and contested, revealing the intricate human stories woven beneath the surface of history. The expectation that every child would marry to strengthen ties. Imagine yourself in a quiet medieval town where the steady clatter of workshops blends with the soft murmur of marketplaces. Life here moves with a rhythm shaped by craft, community, and long-standing relationships. Among the many unspoken understandings woven into daily existence was the expectation that every child born into a guild family would one day marry. Not solely for love or companionship, but as a vital link to strengthen ties between guilds. From earliest childhood, these unions were understood as tools of alliance as much as promises of partnership. Guilds functioned as both economic and social institutions, and their survival often depended on the delicate balance of relationships forged between families. Imagine the parents of a young apprentice carefully considering not just skill and character, but the strategic value of potential marriages. These were not casual matters, but decisions with far-reaching implications. A well-chosen marriage could merge resources, secure contracts, or solidify peace between rival guilds, while a poorly matched union might sow discord or weaken standing. Children grew up in this world where the idea of marriage was less a personal choice and more a chapter in the ongoing story of their family's craft and reputation. Imagine a young boy or girl surrounded by tales of ancestors whose marriages had shaped the fortunes of their guild. From a young age, they were gently guided to understand that their future union was a duty, an essential thread in the fabric of communal strength. Conversations around the hearth or in workshops might allude to forthcoming matches, always spoken with a tone of expectation rather than inquiry. The process of arranging these marriages involved careful negotiation, often beginning long before the children reached adulthood. Imagine families meeting in quiet chambers or bustling guild halls, discussing terms, dowries, and mutual benefits. These talks were part business, part ritual, underscoring the practical nature of such unions. Children, meanwhile, absorbed these dynamics through observation and subtle instruction, learning that marriage was as much about alliance building as it was about personal life. This expectation shaped how children perceive themselves and their futures. Imagine the quiet acceptance mingled with private hopes or fears. Some might look forward to forming bonds with other families, while others might feel the weight of obligation heavy upon their shoulders. The personal became inseparable from the political and economic. Love, when it blossomed, was a fortunate byproduct rather than the primary purpose. Marriages between guild families also reinforced social order and stability. Imagine the festive gatherings that followed weddings, celebrations where guild members and townsfolk witnessed the joining of families, the renewal of commitments to shared values and mutual support. These events served as public affirmations of alliances, strengthening the trust and cooperation necessary for the guild's continued success. The newly married couple became living symbols of these bonds, carrying forward the legacy entrusted to them. Yet beneath this structured expectation lay complexities and challenges. Imagine the young individuals navigating personal desires and family pressures, the delicate balance between duty and autonomy. In some cases, matches were made to settle disputes or rivalries, and marriages could carry tensions as well as hopes. The pressure to conform was persistent, shaping not only personal choices, but entire life trajectories. Education and training within the guild also prepared children for these roles. Imagine lessons that extended beyond craft to include social etiquette, negotiation skills, and an understanding of family alliances. These skills were essential to managing relationships that were as much about diplomacy as domestic life. The children learned that their future roles as spouses involved sustaining the delicate web of guild connections, a responsibility woven into their very identity. In stepping back from these intimate moments, imagine the quiet streets as dusk settles, the sounds of workshops fading into night. The expectation that every child would marry to strengthen guild ties remains an invisible but steady presence, an unspoken agreement shaping lives with gentle insistence. It was a force that connected families, preserved traditions, and ensured the resilience of guild communities through generations. Thus, marriage in guild families was more than a personal milestone. It was a deliberate, strategic act, a weaving together of craft, commerce, and community. Children grew up knowing their unions were tools of legacy as much as promises of partnership, carrying forward the silent but enduring bonds that held the world of the guilds together. The quiet resentment of those born outside guild privilege. Imagine wandering through the bustling streets of a medieval town just as the sun dips low, casting long shadows between timbered houses and narrow alleys. The marketplace hums with the mingled scents of fresh bread, ripe fruit, and the earthy tang of leather goods. Amid this lively scene, a quieter, more subtle tension weaves itself into the rhythm of daily life. A tension born not of open conflict, but of invisible divides etched by birthright and opportunity. While children born into guild families rise early to shape wood, stitch leather, or hammer metal under the steady eyes of masters, others watch from the edges of this ordered world. These children, born outside the protective circle of guild privilege, know the weight of uncertainty. Their futures are less certain, their daily lives marked by a different kind of struggle. They move through the same streets, barter in the same markets, yet the security enjoyed by guild families remains just out of reach, a silent boundary drawn between them. Imagine a boy named Joran, whose family ekes out a living selling second-hand goods in a cramped stall, watching as guild apprentices march past, their steps sure and practiced. Joran feels the weight of envy and resignation mingled together. A quiet resentment not born of malice, but of circumstance. He sees the respect afforded to guild families, the steady work guaranteed, the community's trust carefully nurtured over generations. For him and many like him, such stability feels distant, almost like a story told in a different language. This simmering tension shapes more than personal feelings. It colors the ways neighbors regard one another. In the crowded alleys and market squares, alliances and suspicions form along invisible lines. Guild members often look upon those outside with a guarded gaze, wary of competition or disruption to their tightly held privileges. Meanwhile, those without guild ties may harbor grudges, or simply wear the quiet frustration of exclusion, careful not to upset a balance that already favors others. Yet, the boundaries were seldom absolute. Markets, after all, thrived on exchange, not only of goods but of information, skills, and social connection. Some outsiders found niches as day laborers, informal traders, or assistants, carving small spaces within the larger economy. But these roles often lacked the security and prestige that guild membership conferred. The daily lives of those outside the guild's embrace were marked by unpredictability, by the constant need to prove worth in a world that preferred birthright over effort alone. Imagine the subtle dance of interactions. Guild apprentices receiving polite nods or wary glances as they pass, while outsiders hustle with a mix of determination and caution. The market's energy pulses with this undercurrent, shaping the community's social fabric as surely as laws and contracts. It is a constant negotiation of belonging and exclusion, of status silently asserted and quietly challenged. Historical accounts and legal records reveal that this tension occasionally erupted into disputes, arguments over trade rights, accusations of unfair competition, or challenges to guild authority. Yet more often, the divide remained an unspoken boundary, a social code learned early and observed carefully. In this delicate balance, resentment simmered quietly, shaping attitudes and actions in ways both subtle and enduring. As evening falls and the market's bustle fades, imagine these unseen lines lingering in the dimming light. The hopes and frustrations of those born outside guild privilege blending with the steady rhythm of a world built on tradition and hierarchy. This quiet resentment, held beneath the surface, is part of the larger story of medieval life. A story not only of craft and labor, but of the social ties and divides that defined an era. Imagine yourself walking these streets, feeling the invisible weight of history in the glances exchanged, the whispered judgments, and the silent hopes for a place within a world that often reserved its best for those born into it. The tension between security and exclusion, between tradition and aspiration, is as much a part of the medieval town's fabric as the stones beneath your feet. A reminder that belonging is often shaped as much by circumstance as by desire. The discipline required to uphold a craft through changing times. Imagine the steady creak of wooden shutters opening at dawn, sunlight spilling into a workshop lined with tools worn smooth by generations of careful hands. Here, the rhythm of tradition beats steadily, a pulse rooted deep in the family's craft. Yet beyond the comforting routine lies a persistent challenge. The discipline required to uphold a craft through the shifting tides of fashion and time. In the medieval world, change was inevitable. Markets grew and shrank, tastes shifted with courtly whims, and new materials and techniques arrived from distant lands. Yet the families who bore the responsibility of a guild craft faced a delicate balancing act. Imagine a lineage of artisans, each generation inheriting methods honed over decades, even centuries, methods that defined their identity and secured their reputation. To stray too far from these traditions risked losing the very essence of what made their work valued and trusted. At the same time, stagnation threatened irrelevance. As fashions evolved, customers' desires shifted from the ornate to the simple, from vibrant colors to muted tones, from heavy fabrics to lighter weaves. The craftsman's challenge was to innovate, but with careful restraint. Imagine a young apprentice watching as the master alters a familiar pattern just slightly, testing how new ideas might breathe life into old forms without shattering their integrity. This discipline was taught not only through instruction, but through example and repetition. Children learned early that innovation was not a reckless act, but a measured step, taken only after mastering the foundation. They saw that the past was a guiding frame, a structure that held the craft steady even as small ripples of change passed over it. The workshop was a place where tradition and adaptation coexisted, woven together like threads in a tapestry. Consider how a seamstress might add a subtle trim to a customary garment, or a smith might experiment with a slightly different alloy. These were not bold leaps but careful evolutions, meant to meet new demands while honoring the lineage of skill behind them. Every alteration was weighed against the risk of alienating loyal patrons who trusted the family name as a guarantee of quality and authenticity. Discipline also extended beyond technique to mindset. The craftsman's identity was bound to patience, persistence, and respect for heritage. Imagine the daily routine marked by early mornings and long hours, each task performed with quiet focus and mindful care. Children absorbed this rhythm, internalizing that true mastery was a slow unfolding, built layer by layer rather than seized in sudden innovation. Yet, this discipline was not rigid in flexibility. Within the constraints of tradition lay room for creativity, subtlety, and personal expression. The family workshop was a living environment where small experiments were encouraged, though always under the watchful eyes of elders who measured each change's impact on the craft's essence. As decades passed, families faced the ongoing test of relevance. Economic shifts, political changes, and the arrival of new materials or competing goods demanded vigilance. The discipline to uphold the craft meant constant learning, quiet observation, and a willingness to adjust, but never abandon the foundational principles passed down through blood and time. Imagine now the tension in moments of decision, when a new style threatens to unsettle customers, or when a neighboring workshop introduces unfamiliar techniques. The family's legacy hinges on choices made in these moments, whether to embrace cautious adaptation or hold steadfast to tradition. The discipline to navigate this balance shaped not only the products, but the very survival of the family enterprise. This ongoing commitment was often a silent burden carried by the children, who grew into their roles knowing that innovation was both a privilege and a responsibility. They learned that the past was a trusted compass, not a cage, that discipline was not stifling but sustaining, and that the legacy of craft was a living story, written carefully with each measured stroke of the hand. In this way, the discipline required to uphold a craft through changing times was a quiet force shaping medieval family life. It forged resilience in the face of uncertainty, continuity amid flux, and a subtle dance between reverence and renewal. The legacy they preserved was not static, but alive. A delicate balance of honoring the past while cautiously embracing the future, one careful step at a time. The quiet pride that endured despite hardship and sacrifice. Imagine yourself walking through the narrow lanes of a medieval town as dusk settles, the fading light casting soft shadows over the timber-framed houses. Inside a modest workshop, the day's labors have quieted, but a faint glow from a small hearth warms the room. Amid the tools and unfinished work rests a symbol far less tangible, but no less real. A quiet pride that endures beyond the calloused hands and long hours. For children born into guild families, this pride was an invisible badge, woven tightly into their identity despite the hardships and sacrifices that framed their lives. Guild life was rarely easy. Imagine the relentless pace of work, the exacting standards set by masters, and the ever-present pressure to uphold family reputation. Apprenticeships began early, often before a child fully understood the weight they carried. Days filled with repetition, discipline, and strict oversight formed a world where play was scarce and mistakes carried consequences beyond personal embarrassment. Yet, beneath these demands, a deep current of belonging and purpose flowed steadily, offering a sense of self rooted in lineage and craft. For many children, pride in their family's trade was a silent but powerful companion. Imagine a boy or girl watching an older sibling expertly shaping metal or stitching leather, feeling a spark of connection and aspiration. The family's maker's mark, etched into finished pieces, was more than a signature. It was a symbol of identity, a tangible link to ancestors who had labored in similar workshops long before. This lineage provided continuity in a world marked by uncertainty and change, a steady rhythm to their lives. This pride was not merely inherited, but cultivated through daily experience. Imagine the subtle moments. The approving glance of a master after a well-executed task, the whispered stories of ancestors who had earned respect through skill and dedication, the cautious but hopeful anticipation of someday carrying the family name forward. Each moment added layers to a child's understanding of purpose, an understanding that transcended hardship and sacrifice. At the same time, this enduring pride did not erase the realities of difficulty. Imagine the ache of long hours spent mastering complex skills, the frustration of errors, and the sacrifice of youthful freedom. For many, the toll was physical and emotional, a constant struggle to balance personal growth with inherited expectations. Yet, within this struggle, pride became a quiet resilience, a force that sustained and motivated. The guild's social structure reinforced this sense of identity. Imagine community gatherings where craftspeople displayed their work, shared knowledge, and celebrated achievements. Being part of a guild connected a family to a wider network of support and recognition. This collective pride elevated individual effort, reminding children that their labor was part of something greater, a shared tradition and a respected place within society. Moreover, pride in lineage carried symbolic weight beyond the workshop. Imagine a family crest, a maker's mark, or simply the spoken name of a guild that conjured respect and trust. These symbols were woven into daily life, influencing marriage prospects, business dealings, and social standing. Children grew up knowing that their identity was linked not only to their skill, but to the reputation they upheld. A responsibility and an honor intertwined. As years passed and childhood gave way to adulthood, this pride often endured quietly beneath the surface. Imagine the lifelong satisfaction of having contributed to a family legacy, the subtle comfort of belonging to a lineage that spanned generations. Even as society changed and new opportunities arose, many carried this invisible badge with them, a reminder of where they came from and the sacrifices made to get there. In this way, the quiet pride that endured despite hardship and sacrifice was a cornerstone of guild life. It provided meaning and continuity in a world often defined by struggle and uncertainty. Imagine yourself leaving the workshop at twilight, the faint glow of lanterns marking homes where this pride lives on, soft, steady, and unspoken, yet powerfully present. This invisible badge, forged through years of labor and learning, shaped identities and lives long after the tools were laid down. A testament to the enduring strength found in lineage, purpose, and the unspoken bonds of family and craft.